Hi, I'm Matt Shepard.
And I'm Chad Shepard.
And coming up on this edition of Shep, Shower, and Shave, the biggest disappointment and the biggest surprise in the NFL through the first few weeks, what the Red Wings need to do to get competitive, and our baseball award winners as well. Shep, Shower, and Shave. Proudly brought to you by Hungry Howie's, the Michigan-based pizza company known as the original flavored crust pizza. It also has the best fundraiser around called Dough Raiser. Easy to get involved for your sports team or your school group. All you have to do is go to doughraiser.com. We're brought to you by Nate Noth Designs. Find his work on Instagram or on Facebook. Folks, he's the one who put together the really good-looking Shep, Shower, and Shave logo. And we're also brought to you by Northwestern Tech. HVAC is all they teach. They've perfected their hands-on program for the last 38 years. Their flexible scheduling allows you to keep working your job while training for an actual career, and you can get it done in 10 and a half months. Go to their website, northwesterntech.edu. Really early in the NFL season, but we love talking football. By the way, where have you been? I mean, Shep, Shower, and Shave has barely survived without you. How come it's been so long?
I don't know about that, but I did have to take a little bit of a hiatus during the college football season. That's what takes the bulk of my time, working with the University of Michigan football program. Thank you for having me back.
I'm just glad you're back. All right, you and I are both football freaks. We talk every single Sunday about the games. Is there a surprise? And it's really hard to gauge right now. I mean, if you look at what's gone on in the NFL, who would have ever thought Buffalo would have beaten Denver, especially after Denver was able to open a can of whoop ass on Dallas, right? Who would have ever thought that New Orleans would claim their first victory in Carolina by picking off Cam Newton 3 times, or Minnesota would upstage Jameis Winston in Tampa? There's a lot of 2-1 teams out there. Detroit is one of the better ones through 3 weeks. That doesn't mean I think they're going to win the division, the conference, the Super Bowl per se. Is there a surprise team in the NFL for you so far? Let me give you one in the AFC for me, and that would be the Jacksonville Jaguars. They are a team right now that leads their division and, believe it or not, leads the AFC in point differential. A lot of that is because of what they did to Baltimore and London. But Jacksonville, to me, even though I know they've got some good parts with Jalen Ramsey and Leonard Fournette, Blake Bortles has surprised me a little bit. They're my surprise in the AFC in a good way. Who's your surprise in the AFC in a good way so far?
That was one that I would have mentioned is Jacksonville at 2-1. Their defense looks more stout than expected, and I think a lot of people expected them to cover up the weaknesses that seemed to be Blake Bortles, at least running that offense. They expected him to hand it to Leonard Fournette 27 times a game or so, right, and kind of let him run rampant. I don't think they expected the defense to play this large of a role this soon into how good that team could be. And you mentioned the AFC South, not a very strong division. Tennessee was kind of the preseason darling. Everybody fell in love with them and saw them winning double-digit games. That's not such a sure thing anymore. They haven't looked quite as sharp. They're dealing with a couple injury issues. So Jacksonville certainly qualifies as a surprise team, but I think Buffalo at 2-1 is another big surprise team. They were a team that people thought were kind of mailing it in, almost like the Jets, basically a tank year.
Right.
It's like, how could you have some of these guys even on your roster, trading away some of the players they traded away? Buffalo at 2-1 is another surprise for me. The outlook looks better for Jacksonville because the AFC South is a more winnable division than the AFC East with Tom Brady and the Patriots there. But both of those teams got to be pretty happy sitting at 2-1 early in the year.
All right, biggest disappointment in the AFC. Again, just through 3 weeks. Look, Houston's 1-2. I thought they were going to be better than that, but Deshaun Watson has given them great hope there. I wouldn't call them a disappointment. Mine would be Cincinnati. It's a team that didn't score a touchdown in the first 2 weeks, should have put Green Bay away and could not, and a team now at 0-3 is equivalent to the Cleveland Browns. Now, they're not so far out of it, but they're a minus 27 in scoring ratio. I don't know how much you read into that, how much you think that's important right now, but it's also a team, the reason I choose the Bengals is because they've lost 2 of their 3 games at home. So that's an issue.
No, it's a good point, and they've already made a major change to the coaching staff, which is never a good sign for either the head boss or for some of the players that are playing under that regime. One other one before we move on to the disappointments, I wanted to acknowledge the LA Rams because I think they're the highest scoring team in the league so far in these short
that's
few
in the
games.
NFC. I was going to hit the NFC.
Oh, fair enough. We can move on to that point then.
Right.
Well, then going with AFC disappointments, you bring up a couple good cases. I think New England certainly would have liked to start out with a win, but everybody knows that they'll continue to dominate later in the year.
It's one of the few teams we rarely worry about.
Right. We almost don't even have to look at their record until midseason because you know down the stretch they're going to be at their best. I think Cincinnati certainly qualifies. And look, no one had super high expectations for this club, but Indianapolis has been completely abysmal. They
looked Scott Tolzien though, Chad.
No, that's what I'm saying. Is I was going to acknowledge more of a organizational disappointment because we didn't know how healthy Andrew Luck was going to be, if he was going to be ready for the start of the season. But the way the Colts have kind of failed to rise up around him, everyone's failed to make this a team that can contend without him. It doesn't look like a promising team when he comes back, and who knows when he's going to come back. But when he does, he can't be excited about walking into that locker room. It's not like all the other guys around there have shown, hey man, you're the missing piece, we're just waiting on you. They look like they can barely do anything without him.
How much do we have to weigh in our impressions of other teams before we come to a conclusion? I'll give you an example. You mentioned the Rams, right? And I would guess they're one of the biggest surprises, not just in the NFC West or the NFC, but probably in all of football. But they beat the Colts and the Niners, right? And they lost to the Redskins. In other words, is the 2-1 record slightly skewed? How much do we use that as our belief? Kansas City, I think Kansas City has the most impressive win in the NFL right now. You know, when you look at college football, we do the same thing. Who's got that really impressive win? Well, Alabama over Florida State. And then nitpickers go, yeah, but Florida State's now dropped out of the top 25. They're really not that good. And I said, yeah, but Francois, when he was the starter and they were a preseason number 2, I mean, that's still a pretty darn good win. You know what I mean? And then people go, well, wait a minute, Oklahoma going into Ohio State. That's more because then they'll use Ohio State and Oklahoma from a year ago. Why do we do that all the time in sports, number 1 and number 2? Are we doing that in the NFL right now?
I think in the NFL, these teams seem to be it's more clear what they are, as opposed to growing throughout the course of a season. A college team, you might change a quarterback and change a team entirely.
Like Florida State.
So
right?
exactly. So that's a good example. To continue with that comparison, later in the year, when you look at a college team's resume and they're deciding who should make the playoff, it's going to say beat number 8 West Virginia, beat number 10 Oklahoma State. It's going to give the ranking of the team when they beat them, not where they're at now.
Right.
So for us, for the eye test, for the way we evaluate, you're going to look, the Browns are a bad team, the Colts are not a good team, and that those wins don't have as much value over other teams. But think about a club like Arizona, a club like Seattle, who maybe we thought were a little bit better than what they've shown to be. Yeah. Those teams could look very different in Week 10 or Week 11, and a lot of times you give teams credit for beating a club that ends up not being as impressive as a win later in the year. So it goes both ways.
Well, and that's the reason I bring it up, is because how did we start the conversation? We started the conversation by the surprises: New Orleans over Carolina, Minnesota over Tampa, teams like that, Buffalo over Denver. We're not sure, and that's the beauty of the NFL. And I do that show with Rob Rubik and Lomas Brown every single Sunday. We sit there and we watch these games and we think to ourselves, how do you know? How do you know who's good in the NFL? When we look at the NFC, we looked at the Rams. I think the Lions have been really impressive. I really do. And I'm not saying that as a homer. I'm surprised at how well they've played. It's not easy winning on the road. So I don't care if you go into New York or not, and whether you think the Giants are not very good. You go in there, you get a pretty impressive win. Arizona's defense is good, man. It is. It's really good. For Detroit to be able to do what they did against Arizona was impressive. And I thought Atlanta was the better team. You're at every single home game too. I thought Atlanta was the better team. But Detroit is right there. I'm not saying they're an upper echelon NFL team, but they're not far away. They're one of my biggest surprises in the NFC in general, because I think Detroit's got a pretty good resume with the 3 teams they've played so far.
I agree. They're off to a great start, and what surprised me is some of the completeness of those wins. They're not doing it in one area. They're not relying only on Matt Stafford's arm and one lucky interception or one lucky punt return. They're doing it in all 3 phases of the game. Matt Prater has been excellent. Jamal Agnew's been good on punt returns, although he seemed hurt last week because they had T.J. Jones back there and Golden Tate returning punts. So I think they've shown a little bit more mettle mentally, a little more poise. When they had a slow start against Arizona, they came out and give Jim Caldwell and his staff credit for getting them to turn it around at the break. So yeah, I'm impressed with Detroit. They're one of the more impressive starts so far, and like I said, it's the completeness of the wins that make it look good. And to me, building a lead in the NFC is huge, and we see how many of these divisional races finish with 9-7 teams, 10-6 teams, and there's a tiebreaker or something like that for the wild card. Getting as many legs up as they can on the rest of the NFC is an important thing.
I'll tell you what's interesting is, and I had this conversation during the preseason with Chris Spielman, are they built differently? You're close to the Michigan football program. Michigan is built, I don't want to say differently than Big Ten teams, because you have to be able to weather the elements, no pun intended. But they're so fast defensively. I mean, Michigan, I think, looks like an SEC fast defense, right? I wonder if the Lions are built differently than past Lions teams that seem to be indoor bred, right? I think this is a team that can go into Green Bay and win in late fall, go into Soldier Field and win in late fall. Bob Quinn brings that to them. I think. I really do. I think he's a guy who has noticed that in order for us to win, and he said this on one of the first days he was here, in order for us to win and get to where we expect, it starts up front. The Lions have that type of, when healthy now, when you got Decker and you got Glasgow and you got Swanson, none of those three guys played their positions against Atlanta. That should give you a little bit of hope. But when those guys are in there, I see this team as a club that can win differently than Lions teams have won in the past.
I agree, and I think they're more specialized roles for some of these players, specifically on the defensive side of the ball. You bring in a guy like Haloti Ngata to take a role, and you don't have to worry about that role. He's going to play for you every Sunday, or most. I know he had a couple games where he had injuries in the past, but most of the time you're going to be able to rely on him to take just about every snap, to play a lot. A'Shawn Robinson is kind of that guy in waiting, and then you're able to get more out of guys that you signed for a little bit less. And that's what we've talked about in the past when we've had discussions about the Tigers roster and things like that. You have to be able to get more out of guys that you're paying less. Bob Quinn's done a good job of that by creating competition at every roster spot. So the way the team is built, it's just more thorough, it's more complete from a depth perspective, and guys are put into roles that they're able to be successful. We've talked about how great an addition Jared Davis has been to that linebacking core. When he was hurt last weekend and had a concussion, we were talking about what are they going to do? Are they going to move Tyre Whitehead back inside like he played last year but didn't grade well? And he was playing that position out of necessity?
Right.
No. What they did was they played Nick Bellore at the middle spot where he's played. They allowed Tyre Whitehead and Paul Warlow to stay outside in roles that they're more comfortable in. And Tyre Whitehead, you might not love him, but he grades better at that position, and he's more of a help to the team at that position. And then what they did was played a little bit more nickel, obviously dictated by the offensive sets that Atlanta had used, and that took Nick Bellore off the field a little bit, so he didn't have to play 80 snaps or whatever it might be. Bob Quinn is doing a better job of putting guys in positions to succeed by not asking them to do things that they're not capable of doing.
No, I don't disagree with that at all. Detroit already plays like 70% nickel, so you weren't going to see a lot of Bellore anyway. My problem with the Lions linebacking core, and you're right, everything you said is right. White had 132 tackles last year, led the team. That's all fine and dandy. Didn't create any turnovers, right? And still, Detroit's linebackers against tight ends, opposing tight ends, just carved up on a regular basis. Same damn thing happened against Atlanta.
No, I agree.
Warlow's a nice player, but I don't want him taking 60 snaps. Nick Bellore, look, he's a MAC guy, right? Okay,
right. Well, neither does Bob Quinn, but the point is he wouldn't be. If Jared Davis is healthy, it'd be him and Tyre Whitehead out there.
But it shows you the lack of
regimes.
depth.
But I know, but you can't build depth at all 11 positions at once, and Bob Quinn's doing a good job of doing that quickly. Yeah. And we've talked about this at the offensive line. In past regimes, Taylor Decker goes down, and they might try and just kick Michael Ola over there, kick Corey Robinson or somebody like that over there. They went out and they made a little bit more of a sure-footed decision, and they did it with conviction. They're doing the same thing on the other side of the ball now, and I think that's what the difference is in the regimes. They're not all the way there yet, but it's a different approach, noticeably so.
They get Minnesota this Sunday. Minnesota's a team that can run the football, and they are badasses on defense. You know, it's Kendricks, Eric Kendricks, who's a really good player. It's guys like Harrison Smith in the back end. It's Xavier Rhodes. It's
Anthony
guys
Barr
up front. Yeah, Anthony Barr, who I loved out of UCLA. So they've got some badasses on the defensive side of the ball. That's going to be another close one. And that's the thing that I like about the Lions, too. They have been able to win close games. And I know it doesn't make people comfortable. That's not what their job is. Their job isn't to make you sit back and relax and toast another beer and say, this game's over. It'd be nice to be able to do that like they did with the Giants. But that's not necessary. They can win close games. That tells you something. It'll be interesting to see when the NFL starts on Sunday how players handle all the controversy that has recently been taking place and deal with the national anthem. How do you think it's going to play out?
Well, I think we saw last weekend an example of a lot of teams that felt unified and a lot of teams that were not fully unified in their message, and that played out. We saw the way the Pittsburgh Steelers have kind of dealt with some of the aftermath of everything, and I think the desire to display a unified front is just about universal. The execution of it, not so much. And I think no matter what we see this weekend, it will be more teams doing the same thing. More teams either collectively all making the same decision or just all interlocking arms or all gathering around to support their teammates. And it's not like to this point we've seen 8 players down in the end zone on a knee and everybody else with their backs turned to them. It's been right, but it's still
Oakland.
been some teams doing it, but that doesn't mean their teammates were showing dejection, signs of rejection for what they were doing or that they didn't approve of anything. Even the most spirited people that are separating themselves from those displaying a sign of protest are doing so very carefully and saying how much they respect their teammates' right to protest. That will continue. I think that just collectively we're going to see maybe a couple fewer owners on the sideline, a little bit less pageantry than we saw this past weekend. Because I think some
I
of it
agree.
is that.
Martha Ford on the sidelines, Jerry Jones actually. Dallas took a knee before the national anthem. They were booed severely, but they took a knee before the national anthem. Look, it doesn't matter. I mean, there's
I know,
there's
but
people
that
everywhere.
reaction was to be expected in Texas. I
Okay,
thought.
well, I mean, but the point is, and actually it wasn't. It was Arizona. They were in Arizona.
Stand corrected.
So the point is, there are some people who disagree with. I agree with their ability and their right to do what they want. I wish, and I understand what players are fighting for, and I think it's a noble cause and it should be done. I don't like this way of trying to get that message across because I think there is a mixed message right now, and people are tired of it. And I wonder how the NFL. I mean, I talked to somebody the other day, and they said, I'm really worried for our league. They think this could be a downward spiral and that people are that they're ticking off too many people to almost recover from this. And I think what the NFL's danger is this. The NFL wants to – they're not going to fine teams for staying in the locker room, okay? That's their prerogative. That's fine. Why are they fining guys who want to commemorate 9/11? Why are they fining guys who are wanted to put a sticker on their helmets for policemen killed in Dallas? Why are they fining guys, D'Angelo Williams, who wants to commemorate breast cancer awareness, something that the league already supports? And they're going to fine them. They're fining them for little things like where their socks are and how high they should be brought up, but they're not fining guys for doing something that is against the NFL bylaws. In the NFL rule book, you are to stand on the sideline and put your helmet in your left hand and your hand over your heart. Now, it doesn't always happen. And by the way, Chad, I get tired of people's fake patriotism in this country too, because you and I go to a ton of games, and I see plenty of people on their cell phones walking down to their seat with nachos, talking with one another while the national anthem is going on.
Or failure to remove a hat.
Failure to remove a hat. One of my biggest pet peeves, and you know that. So I think there's a lot of fake patriotism that's coming. But do you not think, could you grant me this, even though it was displayed terribly and in poor taste by the commander-in-chief, could you not argue that maybe this is bringing up two things? A, the racial inequality, but also B, the fact that too many of us take for granted what should be, on a regular basis, more patriotism in our land.
Yeah, I think this is a very difficult and layered topic, obviously, and I think you did a pretty good job of trying to get the ball rolling without, getting too hostile either way or getting too political either way, and I think that's an important thing to talk about. this is a difficult issue because symbolism in America is a very big thing. We have an enormous country with a lot of people. It's difficult to communicate to a lot of people the same way at the same time and get the message universally across and understood the same way. We use symbolism a lot.
Mm-hmm.
The problem with symbolism is once you let that bird go, you can't reel it back in. And it's not in your hands anymore. You cannot tell people how to perceive something. So if you tell one person that the flag means this,
Mm-hmm.
and they feel that way, and they're brought up that way, you cannot sit there and tell them, listen, I know that you perceive the flag to be a sign of military support, a sign of American patriotism, but to me, I perceive it as the fabric of the people of the country,
Mm-hmm.
and right now it doesn't represent a fabric that represents the true demographics of the people. It doesn't do a good job supporting that. Those are two people who have two different definitions of the flag. Neither is wrong.
Yeah.
Who is going to sit there and tell them your definition of it is wrong or the way you perceive it is incorrect? It's extremely subjective in that way, and that's a very dangerous thing with some of the models for support and the way we communicate on a mass scale in this country. I think you would go across NFL locker rooms and scarcely find a person who wants to openly disrespect our military.
Right.
The problem is, as you talked about with fake patriotism, we have a nation that is economically tied to its military, and a lot of times that gets conflated with governmental conspiracies,
Right.
economic drivers, things like that. And there's a lot of truth to some of those components. There's absolutely no doubt about it. But what happens is you have Chris Kluwe type people, who is a former punter for the Minnesota Vikings, who's taken on a lot of social justice issues and done a great job with a lot of them. But he comes across sounding like a conspiracy theorist. And I'm not calling him that. I'm not trying to discredit
Yeah.
what he does. But
Yeah.
if you are a veteran, a child of a veteran, something like that, and you got to listen to the verbiage he uses or some of the phrasing, it instigates. The same way the president instigates
Yeah.
some people on the other side.
Yeah.
It's a two-way street. It's a very difficult topic of conversation. And I think the pageantry and the peacocking, which is kind of what you were referencing in the fake patriotism, is the biggest danger of all. If you can't openly criticize some governmental military decisions, what kind of country,
Agreed.
what is it worth having the free speech for? And at the same time, if you are not humble enough and self-aware enough to recognize that the people who have made a sacrifice and volunteered their lives towards that cause are have a greater notion of patriotism perhaps than you, then there's some issues there as well. And just because you're not willing to sacrifice your life doesn't make you a patriot, and just because you're willing to criticize the country doesn't mean that you're not a patriot either.
Right.
So it's an extremely layered and difficult discussion. And as I talked about, this is the danger with symbolism. You can't define what something means to somebody else.
I don't
and right now we're having a national argument over what things mean. And
You're right.
it's going to look, I think it might look petty in the future.
It makes us look bad. I don't disagree with that. And my father was, a veteran, as you know. The thing is, with the NFL, the reason I think it's even more difficult is because the NFL has had that history of claiming publicly to be in support of the military, involved. You see the commercials during NFL games. You see men and women who have served our nation come out and be recognized. And then you recognize, too, that the NFL was asking for payment from the military for that. $61 million. Now, $700,000 was given back, but $61 million for that stuff. So I think it really forces many of us to look at the NFL sideways and wonder why you have certain standards for certain things and then you're willing to let other things go. That's where I think a lot of NFL fans are worried about jumping off the NFL gravy train.
And when everything comes back to making money, that's kind of what it looks like. And I'm not going to sit here and pretend that the NFL should be a true nonprofit and that's the way that could feasibly work, because at the scale that it is about making money, and you're lying to yourself if you think otherwise. But when the flag is also about making money, when some of the support for the military is also about making money, that's when you run into issues.
Sure.
And I think that adds a layer of depth to the conversation that maybe deserves another session to talk about. But one other thing that you touched on I want to briefly acknowledge is uniform violations, players who want to commend a charity or an organization or something like that the NFL hasn't league-wide supported. It's a slippery slope. I agree with you that those players, it seems like it's a little bit much to fine them and to make them remove a breast cancer awareness sticker or something like that. But if every player's helmet and socks are a canvas for whatever they want to talk about, that space is going to become trivialized very quickly.
Understood.
And it's very clearly laid out. The rules may be stupid. You can criticize
I'm not saying
the rules,
they're stupid.
but this is just like when somebody breaks a law,
No.
doing something else.
That's not what
If
I'm
you
know
know the rules and then you go about and break
I
them.
know, but what I'm saying is,
You have no
how many
excuse.
times do you and I have you participated in sports? You and I watched a game on TV, and what do we ask referees for? Consistency. The NFL's not being consistent.
In its enforcement of uniform violations, I think it is consistent.
It's not being consistent in its enforcement of its rules. Period. The rules are different.
That's fine, but you and I know that
they're picking and choosing which rules to enforce because of the political correctness in our country.
Well, you're talking. Okay, I see what you're saying now. That's correct, but there's a whole code to the U.S. flag about how it should and shouldn't be displayed and used that we totally ignore
right.
across the board as
You're
well.
right, but that's not my argument. My argument is with the NFL. Their choice was to not fine teams or individuals for doing something that is against what the NFL rule book states, and yet they're willing to do it in other instances.
I'll have to see the rule.
Colin
because
Kaepernick goes out with socks with pigs and police, and there's no fine there, man.
Was he not fined for that?
No, I don't believe he was.
I don't know. I have to look into that one. I thought Mike Tomlin said it was not until after 9/11 that teams were forced to come out of the locker room for the national anthem, and that had been common practice before that. So maybe I need to look into that a little bit better.
Look at that. Shep, Shower, and Shave brought to you by Hungry Howie's Pizza. Folks, families eat pizza at least once a week, so it's easy to sell. Go to doughrazor.com for your sports team or sports group or school group to sell some Hungry Howie's Pizza certificates. We're brought to you by Northwestern Tech. HVAC companies, go to Northwestern Tech for their HVAC talent, because it's the HVAC school that gets you trained, certified, and into the field in only 10 and a half months. Call them 248-358-4006. And we're brought to you by Nate Knopf Designs. Find his work on Instagram or on Facebook. Real quick about the Red Wings. It's so tough to tell what's going on right now with this team, but I will tell you this. That Michael Rasmussen, I've watched him the last couple of nights. He's 18 years old. That dude looks good. Okay, I know he's not going to make this team, but he's an 18-year-old. And remember, Ken Holland took a ton of crap for drafting him 9th overall. Dennis Chowalski, a defenseman who many people thought, this guy's a nothing burger. He's 19. These two kids look really good. Now, I know it's an early sampling, and there's a long way to go, but the future may not be as bleak as many people thought it would be. The future of the Red Wings this year, you need Abdelkader to be better than he was a year ago, a minus 20-something. It's unbelievable how bad he was last year. It's unbelievable how many guys had terrible years together, whether it be Nyquist, Sheehan, Abdelkader. We could go on and on and on. But they need Andreas Athanasiou. Is that fair to say? I mean, here's a guy who creates something, not just for goal scoring, okay? I'm talking about penalty killing and speed in general. This team doesn't have as much speed as it really needs to have. Do you not agree? And I don't look, if he's not there now, I'm not sure he will be, but I do know this. The KHL has already started, so he's probably not going to the KHL. He doesn't have a whole lot of leverage here. How much and what are they missing most with a guy like Andreas Athanasiou in your mind?
Well, they certainly miss his speed. They miss his ability to take the puck 200 feet. Or to lead a quick breakout, and he's not as much of a special teams player, but I think that his role would have increased on the power play this year.
Yep.
He's a guy who has a little bit of length and range. He's somebody that you would use in a shootout situation, although that's not why you keep a player on a team. I think you're right. I think if he was going to go to the KHL, he'd be there by now. My bigger concern is probably that this ruins future negotiations, that this ends up on a bridge deal, on a 1 year or 2 year deal, and that there's no real chance of him. It leaves a bad taste in his mouth for signing with the Red Wings in the future.
Deal, I bet, yeah.
Yeah, so if it's a 2 year deal, that's fine. I mean, he's looking at 1.25 1 year for the Wings, or two years at 1.9 per season, which is 3.8, I believe. And at the KHL, I think he has around a $2.5 million offer. So it's a matter of several hundreds of thousands of dollars, which is an enormous amount of money. But when you're talking about millions over the course of your career, I don't know that it's worth him kind of taking this hard of a stance. I don't know if he and his agent have overplayed his hand, so to speak, or how much leverage they really have. But in my opinion, it's not much, because if the Red Wings were a fringe playoff team that were going to miss the playoffs without this guy, and we know the state of the new building and everything like that, and they really needed to sell tickets, and he was that much of a fan favorite, it'd be different. there are. I'm not going to say that these players are the same players because that's not the case, but there are a number of other young, exciting players in the Red Wings uniform, and Athanasiou might be a fan favorite, but this is not a team that's going to compete for a playoff spot. Do they need to sell tickets? Yes. Will the lack of Andreas Athanasiou in the lineup dramatically alter the Red Wings ticket sales throughout the course of the season? I don't think it's going to have that sharp of a contrast.
I don't think it has anything to do with that. I really don't. I don't think it has anything to do with selling tickets and all that other stuff.
Well, I'm saying where's the leverage point for Athanasiou?
That's why I say I don't think he has a whole lot. Yeah. But if this team wants to win long term, I know it's not necessarily this year, he's a centerpiece of what this team's going to be. Him and Mantha, obviously, and Larkin, and eventually Svechnikov, and a guy like Rasmussen that we just talked about. He's an important piece. I mean, he's a top 6 forward for this team. I blame Ken Holland for this reason. Ken Holland, it's not like this came up and it was a surprise that suddenly he's a restricted free agent. He's 23, man. He knew this was coming up, and yet he still went out and signed Luke Witkowski. He signed Darren Helm to a long-term deal. He signed all these guys, and he knew damn well, knowing that and knowing how important he is to your team, why do you go out and do what you've done? To screw up your salary cap.
We've talked about some of the bad contracts. There's no question that they're in a bad cap situation with a number of those deals. And Athanasiou doesn't make enough money to be a cap casualty. That doesn't make enough sense to me.
That's part of the reason they're not signing him.
And that's a credit to the bad management of the salaries. Yes. I am agreeing with you in that sense. To me, this kind of opens the door for the possibility that Athanasiou becomes a Jonathan Drouin-like player for the Red Wings who gets traded for a defensive piece down the line. God. Somebody else finds more value to him because I don't know enough about – I'm not involved in those negotiations. I would have to imagine the relationship's pretty frayed at the end of these discussions.
I want you to think about this for a minute. Riley Shane, you and I both saw him play at Notre Dame. We liked him, okay? He makes over $2 million. He's making over $2 million this year. He's going to be a restricted free agent next year. And maybe that will free up some money. But remember, Larkin and Mantha will be restricted free agents next year. They better have a better handle on their salary cap situation when it comes to those two important pieces.
Well, maybe that's why they're not committing the money to Athanasiou, is they're afraid of this recurring
You're probably right.
set of circumstances next year, and they view the next two guys as more important.
$4 million on Darren Helm for crying out loud.
I know. It's just. But that signing was a couple years ago, and you can't operate in hindsight.
The signing was last year. It was before last year. Right?
I know, but I don't.
It kicked in last year. It was the first year of that 4-5-year deal.
I agree, but lamenting the bad contract doesn't change the state of the current ones, and all they can do is try and better manage what they have. I don't know enough about that system to say whether or not somebody renegotiating their deal could help create some room or alleviate some room.
It's just so frustrating. It's so frustrating because if this happens with a guy like Helm, or it happened with a guy like Sheahan, for example. You almost understand and say, okay, you're not going to miss him. This guy's important. They're going to miss him desperately for this team. This team's not in a situation like Pittsburgh where they can say, you know what, we'll wait it out and see who has the stronger will, and we'll still be okay. They're not okay. They don't have a superstar. Their top 6 forwards can be fluctuated, if you will. They're not one of those teams where the other bench is looking over and going, God, I got to have that guy. Athanasiou is really, really important. All right, let's shift.
Well, the bigger difference for me, I'll make this the final point, is if Ken Holland's sitting on a chair, it's got 4 legs on it, and a couple of those legs have been kicked out already. One of those legs belongs to the fans, right? His support, his tenure here is not directly connected, but is at least partly connected. That fan leg is wobbling if it hasn't tipped over already. If you can't bring Andreas Athanasiou back into the lineup, that fan leg might topple over.
I think that fan leg's already broken. There's no doubt. It might be split a little bit. But in your mind, I think it's already broken. Final thought on what's going on in baseball right now. Let's talk about some of the guys, since this is the last week of the regular season. I want to know who you think are the MVPs, the managers of the year, and the like. Now, the reason I bring this up is because Aaron Judge hit his 50th homer the other day as a rookie. 50 homers. Now, I want you to think about this. 29 guys have done that in history of baseball. The Yankees, the only team to have 5 players do it while that player was on their New York Yankee roster. The Tigers have had 2, Hank Greenberg and Cecil Fielder. He's also got 203 Ks. And I'm not trying to demean what he did, because when the Yankees were in town, I had a chance to sit down and talk with Aaron Judge, and he was in the midst of a terrible slump where he had struck out at least once in 20 consecutive plus games. And I was amazed at how he handled everything. Told him about how you and I watched him at a Cape Cod baseball game one year, by the way. But he's not the MVP. The MVP is Jose Altuve, in my mind, in the American League. But that's not taking anything away from Aaron Judge. Aaron Judge is not going to do what Ichiro Suzuki and Fred Lynn did, and that means being Rookie of the Year and MVP in the same season. I applaud him. I think it's been awesome what he's been able to do. He's been good for baseball as well, but he's not the most valuable player. The most valuable player is playing for the Houston Astros, and I think he's one of the he's probably the second shortest guy to play in baseball too, if not the shortest guy.
Yeah, I think John Paul Morosi brought this up, how great a sport we have when Jose Altuve and Aaron Judge are the two guys being talked about for MVP, at least in the AL. It's a game for all sizes, all body types, all nationalities, and playing styles, and I think that's what makes it so great. I agree with you that Jose Altuve is the MVP. The long-term injuries suffered by Carlos Correa and for the time he was their ace, Lance McCullers, are part of the testament as to why Houston is a well-built team. And Jose Altuve is the biggest piece of that organization. He plays stellar defense. He's excellent on the base paths. He's on base just about every time, and he's a clubhouse leader for that organization as well. So I agree with you that he is the MVP. Aaron Judge has done wonders for the Yankees. I think kind of accelerated their you can never use the word rebuild with the Yankees, but they turned the roster over a lot over the last 3 or so years, kind of like the Dodgers did, or kind of like the Red Sox did when they made those mega trades with the Dodgers, where you're shifting some big names over. Yeah. So I would agree with you that Altuve is the MVP, but that also Judge has had a huge impact on not just the way that baseball has been covered and portrayed this year in the media, but in the way that people have tried to watch it. He's become a little bit of a spectacle in that sense. Yeah. And whenever you have guys like he and Giancarlo Stanton just crushing the ball, it's more exciting for the non-traditional baseball fan.
I just don't like getting caught up. I don't like getting caught up in strictly home runs. You know, there's just so much more to baseball.
Right.
There's so much more to sports than just that sexy thing that's going on there.
Well, in that larger discussion, I think baseball has shattered the home run record again this year, and still going with a few games left. Strikeouts are way up, and in that sense, I mean, maybe this is a discussion for another time, but is baseball worse in that regard? Does anyone manufacture runs in anymore? Bunts are fewer and further between.
Cleveland does a pretty good job of that.
There are from game to game, but I think if we get dangerous or we get into dangerous territory if sexy, sellable baseball becomes what people are trying to play more often as opposed to winning baseball. And that's why I like managers like Ned Yost and Terry Francona and teams that play the way that their teams do.
All right. How about from a National League perspective? Because I think there's a couple of names here. I think there's Giancarlo Stanton, obviously with 57 homers. I think there's Paul Goldschmidt. I think there's Charlie Blackmon. And I'll tell you a name that I think a lot of people have forgotten. We're going to be talking about this on Tigers Live tonight. Joey Votto's got an MLB best on-base percentage. Now, Cincinnati's not winning anything, so that's the problem. But that's a pretty good, strong case you could make for a guy who's gone under the radar. I don't think he wins the MVP, but his name should at least be mentioned in the thought process of the top 4 or 5 guys.
I love Joey Votto. I'm a huge Joey Votto fan. And to me, he might get the treatment this year that kind of Mike Trout has gotten in the past years, although he's a little bit less starkly deserving of the MVP as Mike Trout may have been in the past. But the lack of success for the Reds is going to really inhibit him from being a serious contender
91, folks.
In that conversation. Yeah. I know, which is not even a record that we can have fun laughing at since of how bad the Tigers are, whereas in the past we may have. But I agree with you. Some of the names you brought up. Paul Goldschmidt is another tremendous,
so good
all-around player. I'm a big Charlie Blackmon fan as well. I think what's interesting is we didn't bring up Mike Trout in the AL MVP race. Now, that's largely due to games missed to injury, but it's sad to me that L.A. finally took a gamble, finally bought at the deadline, and is not going to be all that close to getting into the wild card. But some of the names you brought up are big. I like Charlie Blackmon a lot, and I was going to bring Bud Black's name up when we get to the manager conversation because of what he's been able to do in Colorado. To me, Paul Goldschmidt is kind of like the Jose Altuve of Arizona, and I know that's an easy and probably lazy comparison, but he's a guy who does everything. He's a 5-tool player, and he is a kind of quiet guy, maybe in the locker room, a little more quiet than a lot of other vocal leaders, but somebody that people follow. And I think he is actually like Votto in that way.
All right, let me throw a name in here that will raise some eyebrows, but I think it's worth having. JD Martinez. JD Martinez has played 58. Well, I know, but before anybody drives off the road, he's played 58 games in Arizona. Okay,
Well, 64 RBI in those 58 games, I think.
he's got 28 bombs.
Yeah, that's nuts.
In those games. All right. Now, if we're and with the Tigers, he batted .305. Okay, so overall on the year, .304, 44 homers, and he's got an OPS that is just off the chain. I mean, better than Aaron Judge, better than Altuve, better than Giancarlo Stanton. Problem obviously is, would it be an American League or National League, and you can't do that. But boy, oh boy, this guy has made himself a ton of money. For him to turn down what the Tigers offered, I was upset at it because I said, how in the world is this guy going to make, when the Tigers offered him over $20 million a year, how's he going to make that up? He is going to make it up because of what he's doing in Houston or in Arizona. And I'll guarantee you, Arizona, that's going to be one of their priorities. We got to re-sign this dude.
Right. Will they have the money to do that, or is he going to chase the biggest paycheck, or has he gotten a little bit of a taste of winning now where he might actually walk into a better situation? Yeah. I don't know. That's another conversation. But look, he's worth talking about.
Is he better suited for an American League team because he's the designated hitter?
That's a good point. Yeah. But I would ask you this. Does the Tigers' lack of success with him being a major part of that offense and him having to carry that offense for stretches hurt his MVP candidacy despite what he's done in Arizona? Because part of that is the most valuable player, the team that could have least afforded to lose you or least likely to duplicate those accomplishments without you being in the lineup. I don't think it's quite as far-fetched for Arizona they wouldn't have done as well, obviously, but they were in the race. They certainly would still be a playoff team or a team looking at a playoff opportunity.
They were going downward. Remember, they had lost like 11 of 13, 12 of 14, something like that when it happened.
Well, this might be semantics. I just have a hard time giving MVP to a guy who's played for the worst team in the American League and it didn't do enough to impact their place in the standings. Okay. And you can also point to the Tigers' 4-win September and say, look, they plummeted and completely bottomed out when he left. He was a really valuable component there.
Well, it wasn't just him.
But really, that's my thought.
He's also bottomed out when they lost JD or Justin Verlander and Justin Upton.
That's fair. But I'm also saying, and that you're right, that just further conflates the situation. Yeah. But JD Martinez, I'm not saying that, I don't know, this is a difficult part because you don't want to accuse a guy of trying any more or less hard, but can you give the MVP to a guy who's played for two teams, one of which is the worst in the American League, and is in a contract year as an impending free agent?
Right.
I don't know. I think you take a little bit better care of your body. Maybe you're a little more careful coming back from an injury. You take a couple extra days off or something like that if you're in a contract year because you got to look out for yourself.
Yeah, I would just remind people here too. When you look at guys playing for losing teams, because we just brought up Joey Votto. Ernie Banks, Andre Dawson, Cal Ripken Jr., guys who have played for losing teams and still won the MVP. All right, before we say goodbye, I look at Cy Young. I think Max Scherzer is going to win it in the National League. I think Corey Kluber is going to win it in the American League. And then from a Manager of the Year, it's going to be hard for me to vote against Paul Molitor. And the reason I say that is because the Minnesota Twins lost 103 games a year ago. They were a minus 167 in run differential. This year, after beating Cleveland last night 8-6 in a comeback win with Brian Dozier opposite field 3-run bomb, they're going to make the playoffs. They're going to be a wild card. Their magic number is 1. It's basically done because they have a 5-game lead on the Angels. They didn't necessarily buy at the trade deadline either. Paul Molitor, what he's been able to do, it helps that Joe Mauer is back to being himself. It's helping that Dozier is doing what he's done. They've done it. Sano has been hurt, right? So,
and all they've done, I think, is lead baseball and run differential while he's been on the DL.
It's been unbelievable. Yeah. And same thing with their pitching. And he's done it basically with the same guys. I have a hard time voting for somebody other than Paul Molitor and, as you mentioned, Bud Black.
I'd agree. Those are two of the names at the forefront. I think Paul Molitor, it's simply amazing what he's done. And once again, as a Tigers organization looking to get better, we don't have to look outside of our own division as what it could look like if it's done right. Now, when Paul Molitor was hired, I mean, he's a player from a generation that's a little bit before my time. I didn't really have the opportunity to watch him play. You filled me in on what kind of player he was.
So good.
Some of the traits that he displayed on the field sound like they translate perfectly to the managerial role. That is a great find and a great job by the Twins organization. It's almost quintessential small town Minnesota type of thing, that it's not a bigger story than it is. Because if you get the hometown guy, I mean, think about in New York, the way Joe Girardi is treated as a former Yankee and things like that. It's just it's very different. So I give a lot of credit to them. I give a lot of credit to the way the organization has rallied around him and the way that locker room has rallied around him, led by Joe Mauer and others, and a really young team. Bud Black is somebody you mentioned who I like a lot in Colorado, simply because a lot of the pieces that are there now have been there in years past, even with Troy Tulowitzki added before he was traded to the Blue Jays a couple of seasons ago. And nobody was able to get the level of success out of Colorado that Bud Black has been able to get. We knew he was an excellent manager in San Diego. I don't know if people thought he would make the Rockies a contender this quickly, because they're a quality team. They're hidden in that NL West, but they're a very, very dangerous team, and they're somebody that I don't think a lot of teams want to play in the playoffs. They also acquired Ian Desmond over the season. He hasn't been healthy all year.
Right.
So in a ballpark that's difficult to pitch in, he's able to get enough wins out of that staff, get enough depth of pitching out of that staff, and have the emergence of a couple guys to have a really quality year. But I don't want to completely overlook Dave Roberts. I know that the Dodgers had a long losing skid for a while, but what they've done has been exceptional. So maybe the
helps to have the Rookie of the Year in Cody Bellinger, helps to have Corey Seager, helps to have.
But some of the injuries to their rotation that they
Kershaw
had to,
was hurt.
They had to battle through. Hyunjin Ryu, Scott Kazmir was not available all year.
Right.
Brandon McCarthy hasn't been a help to them. Even Kenta Maeda has been hurt for
Seager
stretches.
got hurt for a while.
Exactly.
Right. Justin
So
Turner
I
should
think
be in that MVP conversation too.
Another player I like quite a bit, but. Dave Roberts at least belongs in the conversation just because they went on that long skid. The fact that he was able to turn them out of it, I think, and they're playing better again now is something that he deserves credit for.
I think
as
it's
well.
a really fun discussion because we didn't even mention Dusty Baker, and they got the second most wins in the National
And that's what
League.
I was going to say. Do the Nats catching up to the Dodgers, even though they're not going to catch them completely, does that diminish some of Dave Roberts' candidacy? Because you can't say, okay, they got 12 more wins than anybody in the NL anymore.
Right, but when you look at Washington, you look at their balance. I mean, it's pretty impressive what they've done so far this year. It's great to have you back. Let's do it again real soon. Shep Shower and Shave brought to you by Hungry Howie's, by Northwestern Tech, and Nate Off Design.